Hi everyone, welcome to week 3. This week we'll be continuing to think about living inquiry, phenomenology, and the study of lived experience. And we'll be specifically paying attention to hermeneutics and research and writing. And we'll be considering research as a poetisizing and a pedagogical activity. So this week we're going to be mainly focusing on writing hermeneutically. So this week you'll be participating in your virtual collaboratories. Be sure if you haven't already done so, to post an editable Google Doc to the virtual collaboratory sign-up page. This week you'll be revisiting the Van Manen chapter 1, and you'll also be reading chapter 2 from pages 35 to 41, as well as chapter 3 from pages 54 to 62. And then you'll also be reading an article by Carl Lego titled The Heart of Pedagogy. So this week, your task is to complete portfolio entry 2 and post it by Sunday to the eLearn forums for others to read, and then you can respond to other posts. So this week we'll begin beginning to discuss interpretation within a phenomenological lens and hermeneutics, how we might think with language to enliven our interpretations with enhanced meaning. As Van Manen tells it, he says, a bringing to speech of something on page 32, to consider what becomes possible when you attend to the essence of the livedness of something, to its relational qualities, not the thing as it is static or isolated or unbecoming, but the thing in relation and as it's lived with others. So as you think with these articles and the chapters from the text, pay attention to what is valued here, what kinds of orientations are being taken up, and what might be some of the effects of this approach. This is something that you've been thinking with in terms of your portfolio entry from last week and attending to what does paying attention actually do? How might you imagine these ways of paying attention manifesting with children and with others? So the aim of hermeneutic descriptions is to transform lived experience into a textual expression of its essence in such a way that the effect of the text is like a reliving of the meaningful aspects of the event. And in reading this text back, you're animated, and those who read it are animated in that very particular lived and situational moment. So we're reliving it alongside. So in this sense, the process of hermeneutic writing is the creation of a memory revisited. So this week we're going to think more about writing meaning into being, not as a literal description or telling what happened, but something written as you live it. On page 36, Van Manen writes that the lived experience is the starting point and end point of phenomenological research. The aim of phenomenology is to transform lived experience into a textual expression of its essence in such a way that the effect of the text is at once a reflective reliving and a reflection of the appropriation of something meaningful, a notion by which the reader is powerfully animated in his or her own lived experience. He goes on to say that the phenomenological inquiry is not unlike an artistic endeavor, a creative attempt to somehow capture a certain phenomenon of life in a linguistic description that is both holistic and analytic, evocative and precise, unique and universal, powerful and sensitive. And on page 37, he gives an example of when he was riding his bike with his son. And this is a great example of that balance between holistic and analytical, unique and universal, powerful and sensitive. So he speaks to the particular quality of the experience of riding the bike and the kind of open talk between him and his son as they engage with each other in riding bikes. This is a very different tone and atmosphere and essence of talk than, for example, talking at bedtime. So the lived experience of talking with his son while riding a bike is very different than the lived experience of talking with his son at bedtime. So he speaks to a way of constructing texts, gathering, reflecting, and reconsidering a phenomena in his search for meaning, for meaningfulness and the nature of an experience that is specific and particular. On page 41, he writes, "It's not enough to simply recall experience. Instead, I must recall the experience in such a way that the essential aspects, the meaning structures of this experience as lived through, are brought back, as it were, in such a way that we recognize this description as a possible experience, which means as a possible interpretation of that experience." So in this way, your writing is subjective. It's not something that's objective or universal. This is the task of the phenomenological research and writing, to construct a possible interpretation of the nature of a certain human experience. So in other words, you're not seeking to define the truth of something, but you're imagining that this is a possible interpretation of it. So the aim is to evoke understandings through language, language that is compelling and insightful. And this is why phenomenological inquiry must be very specific. You'll need to closely attend to the minute details of how something is, how it got to be, and how it becomes. And language is crucial here. For example, the language I use to tell an experience with fabric might be very different than the language I would use to describe an experience with stone or rocks. Language must be specific to the experience and carefully curated. So in the case of fabric, I might use language such as tangling, wrapping, swaddling, raveling, unraveling, knotting, tangling together. So the poetics of language, the metaphors, the playfulness of words and their games enhance the telling of the experience, and therefore phenomenological writing must be highly intentional. And these words help us to get a better sense of what it was like to be there.